Welcome to another episode of the Pelican Scoop Podcast. I'm your host, TK. Got the pleasure of being joined by Chris Mulholland. Chris is a Sports Illustrated Fan Nation Inside the Nets, as well as a Nets Daily Insider, covering all things Brooklyn Nets. Chris, how you doing tonight, sir?
Doing good, brother. I'm very glad to join you. Obviously, we're both in the middle of watching some football in between. It's obviously chatting up some Victor hype as well. It's a great time talking with you. I like it.
No doubt about it. So, look, I want to jump right into it. And so, just from an outsider's perspective, looking at the Nets offseason, we could kind of categorize it as chaotic, to say the least. You had the KD trade request, you had the uncertainty with Kyrie and his future, and now you got Ben Simmons being integrated into the team, even though he didn't play a game last season. So, just you looking at things, what is the psyche of the team heading into the season opener on Wednesday?
I think it's highly anticipated. It's filled with excitement, and at the same time, the biggest word you got to have is patience, and that's the last word Nets fans want to hear, right? Throughout the whole 2 years, or even through, you could even date back to that when Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving came, right? The Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving era, the 7-11 era. So when you look at this new kind of addition to it, this new rounded big three, obviously, when you see how Nets fans kind of reacted to the preseason, especially these last four games, the last four preseason games, it's the first time that James Harden was an afterthought, right? It was, but like the rest of the regular season, all of it was about, okay, like when James Harden left, how are they going to be without it? Obviously, you have Seth Curry, you have all these other pieces that came along in the deal, but obviously we all know what happened. They got swept in the first round series by the Celtics. So when you look at this year, it's going to be interesting because obviously with Ben Simmons, he's one of those guys that Nash is going to put at different positions. We saw in the preseason that they put him as the ball handler. We saw it some stints. They put him as a stretch five, see what he could do down there in a small ball lineup. But I think right now the Nets are kind of they're looking at kind of going with a little bit of a bigger lineup. I'm not with a big, obviously. But, with Joe Harris on the shelf, Seth Curry on the shelf, Edmund Sumner, who's kind of you could kind of tell within the realm of the Nets that he's going to be a valuable role piece as well. And then obviously I think Royce O'Neal will start for the Nets there too, and taking over Joe Harris's spot. So we'll see what happens when it all develops. Obviously Wednesday night against the Pelicans, that'll be a big game for them. It's going to be a good test as well, and I'm really excited for it.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And so it's interesting that you mentioned the word patience, and he also brought up Coach Steve Nash as well. And so he's been a guy that's been highly criticized in his 3 years coaching the Nets. So how much of the hot seat is he really on if he can't get this team to where everyone expects him to be, which is in the finals and competing for championship year in and year out?
Yeah, that's a great question because obviously when you look at the Nets' first 25 games, right, a dozen of them are against playoff caliber teams, if not more than that, right? So it's a very challenging beginning of the season for the Nets. And when you look at it, Steve Nash has talked about it, Kevin Durant has talked about it, even Kyrie Irving's even mentioned it a couple of times that they view this as a new team, right? There's several new faces, and obviously, like in the NBA, players come and go. You're going to have new faces come and go. But with this team, it's more so they have a lot of new faces, but they have a lot of more valuable new faces, right? You have guys like Ben Simmons, Royce O'Neal, those type of guys that are going to be able to gravitate and really play alongside the stars and have more of a valuable starter dynamic roles than obviously the bench guys. So when you look at Steve, for example, obviously, he's been dealt a rough hand. Yeah, I know a lot of that does get blown over. That you got to think about it last year from obviously all the COVID-19 breakouts, guys missing a ton of games because of that. Then you obviously have freak injuries with Kevin Durant, his knee injury. Then you have obviously Kyrie Irving's vaccine refusal that obviously limited him to playing only 29 games last season, regular season games. So he's been dealt a very, very hard hand. Even when you look at the first year when he came in too, that was a hard one to deal with too, with obviously the Milwaukee series and everything there, and mostly how everything dated back then too. So when you look at Steve, it's going to be dictated on whether the Nets or Sean Marks, for example, are they going to really apply a lot of pressure on the Nets to get this figured out early, right? That's the main theme, because you also got to remember the biggest test that this Nets team is going to face this season, or at least in the regular season, is how they react to adversity. Because you saw when Kevin Durant was at Media Day when he was talking about that trade request and why he did that, why he rescinded it. He talked about, hey, not enough guys were held accountable. The stability, I was worried about the stability of the roster. Considering my age as well, I don't have that many years left in this game. He wants to win. And when you looked at everything that happened last year, he also played, I think, the 7th most minutes per game last year, if not 6th. So, that's a hard toll on his body to even maintain that. So, when you kind of put it all together, like I said before, I think with Steve, it's going to depend on how the organization views it, the first 25 games or so. But, in my mind, it's safe to say that Steve Nash will need to come out to a hot start, or at least, not a 10-5 start or something like that. It's got to be something that shows a lot of promise early.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think both teams are coming with a lot of expectations heading into the season. The Pelicans are a young and upcoming team. They made the playoffs for the first time in 4 years, and now they're incorporating Zion Williamson back into the fold. So most people are looking for them to go further, to advance even further. And as we just mentioned about the Nets, when you got guys like Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, it's really that championship or bust type of mentality surrounding the team. So how do you think they will be able to deal with the weight of kind of like that on them? Say, hey, this is a championship or bust type of season for us.
I feel it's interesting, right? Because when we talk to those players, like especially Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, Ben Simmons, especially the main guys, and even Steve Nash, and we brought up that, hey, now that you know that your title window is closing each year, obviously in the NBA, as you know, your title window closes each and every year. It could look like, hey, a player signs 4 years or 5 years, but your title window may be only 2 or 3 years. It's not going to be that full 4. And the Nets it's starting to become that realization. So when you look at it, it's more so how are they going to handle it? It's going to be, it's because what I was going to say too is those players, they kind of dumb down the expectations. I was really looking for a word to kind of come up to kind of summarize that more, but they dumb down their expectations. They're like, hey, we like being the team that all of a sudden we were the championship favorites, but now we're kind of counted out. We're known as the mystery team. We're like, there's other contenders out there that are viewed a lot higher than us, such as the Clippers, the Bucks, obviously what the Celtics could do, the Golden State Warriors. They're not really in that same, they're in that same tier 1 conversation because of talent, but people know obviously with the history of these teams and the personalities that mix in, that they're not fully banking on the Nets to kind of go all the way and put their money down early and say, hey, this is the team that's going to win it all. So when you have those players take that approach, I think it's interesting because it does relieve some more pressure because they know that, hey, we still got to go out and meet surpass those expectations. But at the same time, they got to realize that, hey, that this is, like I said before, it's a new team. Ben Simmons is going to have a huge role with this team and obviously multiple roles. When you have a guy that could pass like that and get open shots, these guys got to figure out how to play with each other and what the kind of the dynamic roles are, especially when you got Seth Curry and Joe Harris sitting on the bench. Joe Harris only played in 1 preseason game. Seth Curry still hasn't been able to do a 5-on-5 yet from his ankle rehab since his offseason ankle surgery. So, it's going to be very interesting these first, I would say, even the first month of the season. That's when you're really going to find out what the identity of the Brooklyn Nets is.
Yep. So that kind of segues into my next question. Real games start on Wednesday. I was going to ask, how does the Nets look from a health perspective heading into the season opener?
Yeah. So Joe Harris and Seth Curry are both ruled out. So there's not going to be a change in their status. Joe Harris is on the kind of in the tail end. They're both in the tail end of their respective, obviously, recovery. So Joe is obviously, well, I'll start with Seth. Seth's obviously in an ankle rehab. He's not on 5-on-5 yet, but he's done 4-on-4 and he's done individual drills with coaches. Joe has foot soreness dating back to obviously his 2 ankle surgeries that he had in the offseason. So when obviously a player gets back on the court after a long time away, especially 2 operations, it's going to deal with some soreness. So the Nets are taking a precaution approach and saying, let's just sit you for the rest of the preseason. We'll see how you respond in these coming days leading up to the season opener, and then see what happens. And then obviously see if it dictate if he's healthy or not, say for obviously the Raptors game on Friday, right? So we got to see from that. Edmund Sumner's, I guess you could say he's questionable because right now he's dealing with a minor hip strain. It's all about how he responds in the coming days. Steve Nash ruled as a minor hip strain last week, and obviously it's starting to carry it over into this week. So we'll see how he goes on. But outside of that, everyone else is healthy, ready to go.
So I think Joe Harris being out and Seth Curry being out are huge because the Pelicans really struggle defending opponents' 3-point shooting. In the preseason, they were atrocious. They gave up about 13 threes a game. So that was actually part of my keys to the game, trying to defend the opponent's 3-point shooting. For your perspective, keys to the games for the Nets to be successful on Wednesday, what do you see that looking like?
I was just going to bring it up. It was 3-point shooting. And then one other thing to the injury report, obviously, as we all know, TJ Warren's come back from his foot rehab. He's going to be reevaluated in November. So you guys don't even have to worry about that.
Yeah.
But, like with the Nets, it's going to bank on their 3-point shooting. It's going to bank on their ball movement. And it's really going to bank on, can they put a full 48 minutes of play together? Those are the main three areas of play. Because when you saw in the preseason, they showed flashes, right? In the first two games, it wasn't Nets. It wasn't really how Steve Nash wanted the Nets to play basketball, let alone how NBA fans want to see their team play basketball. Because it was very sloppy. Ben Simmons was very, very passive. It looked like he was simply just trying to get the ball out of his hands to his teammates' hands. And then obviously he got more comfortable in the second game. And then obviously against Milwaukee and Minnesota, he turned up that aggression. He wasn't scared to get to the foul line. He took the foul shots. And overall, he was just able to just kind of get to the rim, drive. But his main niche on this team is obviously going to be pushing the ball in transition, rebounding, and finding his open teammates along the wing, right? So that's going to be the biggest thing. And like I said, on the defensive side of the ball, Steve Nash is kind of really, even dating back to last year, he said the same thing. It's a simple message that's carrying over, which is that we got to find our identity through the defensive side of the ball more than anything. Because obviously, everyone knows how prolific this Nets offense could be if the defense could hold it together, right? Obviously, if you get a stop, you can push it in transition, like I mentioned before. And on top of that, the Nets don't want to be labeled as that team as they've seen in recent years where, their opponent, they just try to outscore their other opponent. You know what I mean? They want to value the defensive side of the ball. When you bring guys in like Royce O'Neal, one of the most prolific, I guess you could say well-known 3-and-D wings, veteran presence in this league. Obviously, he wasn't able to get it done with the Jazz or get over that mountain. But everyone knows what the type of defensive profile and that defensive skill set he brings. Guys like Ben Simmons, for example, he doesn't really need any introduction to his defensive side of the ball. His resume kind of speaks for himself. And then how is the development of Nick Claxton going to go down low? Obviously, you look at the rest of the bench. Yuta Watanabe, for example, another 3-and-D guy that he wants to kind of fulfill and carve a role out for himself. And then, you look from top to bottom, obviously Kevin Durant's a very underrated defender, underrated rim defender as well. So if they could just kind of put those three avenues together, 3-point shooting, defensive side of the ball, and kind of just get the ball moving and get the ball popping to get those generated good looks from three, I think they'll do fine against New Orleans. But at the same time, it's New Orleans. Obviously, those guys on that side of the ball. I think it's going to be quite the test for Brooklyn.
Yes, I do too. I think it'll be a great game either way. And so last year, the Pelicans had, three rookies who made tremendous impacts on the team. They were integral in the success for the Pelicans going down the stretch and head to the playoffs. So when you had guys like Herb Jones and you had guys like Jose Alvarado, Trey Murphy III, a lot of fans are looking for them to make that next step this year, improve upon year one, and see what they look like in year two. On the Nets, is there a guy who you're looking to see make a dramatic leap from one year to the next, or maybe an unsung hero coming up?
I would say it's Nick Claxton. It's definitely Nick Claxton. That's the name that everyone wants to see the development, right? Because with Nick Claxton, obviously, aside from his poor 3-point shooting, they want to see him. Obviously, he really thrived with Harden, right? In the pick and roll, obviously, how he could kind of serve. He's a switchable big. He actually defends very well against guards. I forget what the exact percentile he is in that category, but he's up there. So Nick Claxton's one of those guys because he's put on a good amount of mass, good amount of muscle this year. It's nothing that's kind of like, oh, wow, like jaw dropping, but you could tell from a visual difference when you do the side by side, so he's up there for one. Another guy too is, I guess you could say, even obviously not a lot of Nets fans are too high on, but I would say Cam Thomas is another one. With Cam Thomas, he's that kind of that rookie that's known for his scoring power. He's well known at LSU. He's obviously one of the most highly aggressive scoring guards in that draft class, and he slid to the Nets at 29 or 27. And it's going to be interesting to see what the kind of role he carves out, because Steve Nash is known for playing a lot of veterans, and especially on this team when you have obviously the pieces that they added in the offseason, like I mentioned before, it's going to be hard for Cam to see some minutes at times. And Steve Nash, he rolls that way. He wants his players to learn from afar, and then he may send them down to Long Island for a couple of G League stints or whatever the case is. Nothing crazy, but just get their reps up and stuff like that. Biggest loser is going to be Kessler Edwards, because obviously the wing depth, especially when TJ Warren's returns. Because when you think about it, obviously Royce, Joe, Yuta Watanabe, TJ Warren, and then you got Kessler Edwards, who's kind of in that spot as well. It's going to be hard for him to carve out a role. So I'm interested to see what the team does there. Outside of that, everyone obviously wants to see the development of Ben Simmons. That's the other thing. Even because people forget he's so well known. Obviously, everyone knows about him, but he's still only 26 years old. And obviously, I know in the NBA, I guess you could say any obviously, too, for anywhere from 25 and under, people consider young. And that's when the time where you really develop and carve out your game, right? But, I think with Ben, it'll be interesting to see kind of this new version of Ben, right? There's Ben that could really create or generate open looks for his teammates, be aggressive getting to the rim. Is he going to kind of take some mid-range shots? He did a little, obviously, he had a floater or two in the preseason as well. Can he incorporate that into his offensive bag? I guess when you put all those pieces together, those are kind of my three guys that I'm really keeping an eye on to take that developmental leap outside of obviously the stars and the production.
For sure. And so kind of staying on the Ben topic, you mentioned Cam Thomas and his ties to LSU, Ben Simmons the same way. For those who hadn't seen, how has he looked in preseason?
Ben Simmons or Cam?
Ben.
Ben's looked pretty good. Like I mentioned before, he was very passive in the first two games, and that's rightfully so. That's his first time in an NBA game setting, and obviously 470 days. So he spoke afterwards saying he wasn't nervous; he was actually excited. But when you return to basketball, especially professional NBA basketball after 470 days, you're going to obviously feel a little wonky. It's going to feel a little weird. You're not going to be totally comfortable and adjusted to it. So that's why he was very passive in the first game. And then I think his biggest development was I think the biggest standout game he had was against Milwaukee, because obviously against Minnesota he fouled out in 11 minutes. It was unfortunate. He was very aggressive on the defensive side of the ball, so we didn't get a good showing there. But against Milwaukee, he held Giannis to 6 of 21 shooting when he was guarding him. He fended him in the post very well. He pushed it in transition. I think he also obviously even clogged up passing lanes as well. That's another thing. Plus, he's that type of guy that could really fit in Steve Nash's switchable defense, because Ben's quick with his feet. He could defend multiple positions. He could defend multiple guys. And that's where he's going to make his bread and butter on this team, is playmaking and defense. That's really, and obviously everyone expects that. It's not going to be the shooting, because Steve Nash even said we don't need him to shoot, which is going to be interesting, because obviously in today's game, there's not many guys that are demanded to not shoot the ball, or even say, hey, we don't even want you to develop. They obviously want him to develop that aspect of it, but there's no necessity and dire need for him to shoot, especially with obviously all the surrounding weapons that they have that can shoot the balls, named Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving, and obviously the rest of the teammates on the team.
Yeah, no doubt about it. So you talked about Ben Simmons' return finally to the NBA regular season. It'll be the same for Zion Williamson. He hadn't played a regular season game in over 400 days. So just from the Nets perspective, what type of issues does he present as being that force down blow against a Nets team?
Oh, size and power. Like that's going to be a big one, right? That's good, because they obviously with Giannis. And how is Ben Simmons going to handle it? Because obviously I think Ben's going to take that assignment, right? Because they took it, like I mentioned before, he took it against Giannis. And obviously, Nick Claxton had a little bit of trouble defending Giannis in the preseason game. And when you look at a guy like Zion, who could just move so quick, very agile, aggressive, I believe he has a full. I think the hope is that he's going to have a full practice tomorrow. I believe. I think that's what the hope is. So we'll see kind of what percentage he's at, if he's ready to go. I think he'll be pretty much ready to go. Plus, at the same time, you got to remember that he's not afraid to shoot the ball either. That's another thing. He's not afraid to shoot it. He's not demanded of it, because of obviously like the Nets with Simmons, there's weapons around him that shoot the ball at a higher percentage. But it's going to be that type of kind of force player, that aggressive player, the player that everyone knows Zion can be. Obviously, I think the battle on the boards is going to be huge when Zion's on the court. I think that's going to be a big difference maker when you really break down the minutes after the game. When you look, that's going to be big as well. And it's going to be. I think it's going to be interesting. My biggest thing to look forward to is obviously Ben on Zion. I think that's going to be a big test for Ben, and I think it's going to be a good kind of I guess you could say a visual for the Nets to see, okay, so how can we gauge where Ben Simmons can defend, and obviously the size of guys, and obviously what other defenders they throw out Zion when he's out of the game.
Yeah, no doubt. Definitely be a key match to look forward to. And I know it's so hard kind of predicting these things, and I'm not asking for a score or prediction, but kind of how do you see this game playing out on Wednesday?
I think it's going to be tight. I think it's going to be a tight one. And obviously, I know a lot of Nets fans think that it's going to be tight, but there's going to be kind of sporadic. There's going to be spurts where the Nets could go up 20, but their lead gets shrunken down to 5, and it could kind of go like that aspect. I do see it happening that way. What the biggest key for this Nets team is obviously to start strong early. That's the biggest thing, because we saw so many times last year with this team, especially under Nash as the coach, that the team start off slow, and then you're kind of playing downhill throughout the rest of the game. Then when you get over the hill, then obviously, so for like the Pelicans, for example, they would come back from 10, go back up 10, and then you're kind of in that same chase, and you can't really generate a rhythm, right? So that's going to be a big one. I see the game I see. I guess you could say, I do see it being a close one. I think it's going to be inside 10 points. I think Kevin's going to have a good game. I think Kyrie's going to have a great game. I think Kyrie's going to have a better one than Kevin. And I think Zion is going to have a monstrous double-double.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're all looking forward to here. I know everybody up there is looking forward to Wednesday on prime time on TNT, start of the regular season. Before we got here, Chris, let the people know how they can get in contact with you and keep up with your excellent coverage about the Nets.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously, I'm on Twitter, CMILHOLEN, Chris SB. So Chris Milhan on Twitter. Obviously, my work's like you. It's on Fan Nation with a part of Sports Illustrated. So that we have coverage there on Nets, and I contribute as well to SB Nation's Nets Daily, covering some game recaps, miscellaneous coverage or content pieces as well. And yeah, that's where you can pretty much find me. And Terry, it's been a blast. I really, really enjoyed this. So much fun.
Thank you for joining us, and we're looking forward to Wednesday. You take care, buddy.
You take care too, brother.